Hey y'all, I'm Tara Shaver with AARP's Office of Volunteer Engagement, and today we're hearing tales of the New Hampshire presidential primary on the Roost. I'm here with Jeannie Tucker from the New Hampshire State Office, along with volunteers Mary Roberge, Stephanye Schuyler, and Marc Lacroix. So good to see you guys again. Welcome to the Roost.
Well, thank you.
Thanks. It's great to
Yeah.
be here.
I was with you guys just what feels like a decade ago. It was just a few months ago in a real winter time. And it was so nice to get to take a break from Tennessee, where I think we probably still had 70-degree weather, and come up there and actually see snow several times. Every 4 years, presidential candidates descend upon New Hampshire for the first in the nation primary. All eyes are on New Hampshire as candidates traipse about the state, presenting their campaign platforms and hoping to secure supporters. For AARP, informing our members and the public on these key issues such as Social Security, Medicare, and the cost of prescription drugs, which was our hot ticket this year, and where each of the candidates stands on these issues is of paramount importance. And that's what we're talking about today. You guys have done a phenomenal job in all of your activities. And I know the work that you put in was happening long before we all arrived on the ground there. I think more than 6 months or so that you guys had been on the trail as well. So I'm so excited to get to dissect that a little bit and hear more about how you all were organized. So Jeannie, let's get to know you guys, and we'll start out with you. How long have you been with AARP?
So I have been with AARP for just over 11 years now. I have served in 3 different positions in 3 different states in Vermont, Wisconsin, and now New Hampshire.
Awesome. So how about the volunteers? Stephanie, I see you first in the corner of my screen. How long have you been around with AARP?
I think I've been around for the last 5 years and predominantly been doing fraud fighter work. So this is a little bit different, but it's also advocacy work. So
yeah, thank you. And Mary?
I have been with AARP for 5 years also, and I do a lot of different things in my volunteer work. I am the lead volunteer for the Greater Manchester Community Team. I am also a member of the Speakers Bureau for AARP, and I am involved with the Capital City Task Force.
This definitely keeps you busy, doesn't it?
I love it, though. I absolutely love it.
We're so glad. And Marc, how about you?
So I'm the newbie to the group. I've been with ARP for about 2 years now, and I really started on the advocacy team, and it's sort of my roles. So I'm looking at different opportunities to expand my role, and I was able to get my wife, and now she's one of the volunteers as well, and so we can do things together.
I love it. And that's something we hear so often, and also friends who volunteer together, which is really nice. It's one of our easiest ways to recruit new volunteers because that they bring someone really close to them with them. So tell me, guys, was this the first presidential primary that you have participated in with AARP as a voter engagement volunteer?
No, this was my second. I was involved in 2016 with AARP was doing Take a Stand. We were gathering petitions and doing basically the same type of work that we're doing now, but that was my first initiation into volunteer engagement work.
Yeah, you were just a baby then, right? That would have been just bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, showing up for whatever we had to throw your way, right?
Exactly.
Stephanie?
this was my first time.
Okay.
I've done other public affairs work, but have never done anything with the New Hampshire primaries. So I saw this as an incredible opportunity, and it certainly was.
Love it. And Marc, this had to be your first.
Yeah, it was my first, and I had really never gone to so many candidates events before, and it was really great being part of the team, and I enjoyed it a lot.
It's so unbelievable. Like I have thought many times about how many events you guys had already had under your belt before we arrived to go with you, and just how that was changing every day. And I'm still getting text messages from the campaigns. So
I do.
So even though I do the, stop or end or whatever, I'm still getting a new one.
Yeah.
I'm like, do I remember even going to this event? Oh my gosh. So let's talk a little bit about how you guys were organized and how you really became prepared all those months prior to be able to turn out the way that you did. Jeannie, can you set us up for talking about this conversation?
Absolutely. So I knew from the very beginning of conceptualizing what our approach to the primary work was going to be that I really wanted there to be as much volunteer leadership as possible. So I had an idea for volunteer captains, essentially volunteer leaders who would lead small teams of maybe 5 to 7 volunteers, mobilize those volunteers to attend candidate events, develop their own reporting structure within their teams, send reports back to the office, serve as eyes and ears in the community, engage AARP members and the public on our voter engagement issues, and really be identifiers of issues or additional training needs or problems that might surface. So that was like this conceptualized idea at the beginning. So we invited new and existing volunteers to participate in what we called an activist academy, which served as a mix of issues training, social and traditional media training, as well as learning about our planned approach for the voter engagement work, like how we were going to track our candidates and what questions we could ask of them, and what the volunteer structure would ultimately look like. So participants in the academy were invited to opt in to voter engagement roles of their choosing, anything from serving as a visibility role, just showing up to candidate events, wearing our Stop RX Greed garb, which I have my Stop RX Greed jacket here, to serving as social media engagers, and all the way up to serving as a volunteer captain. So ultimately, we ended up with 8 volunteer teams that were located in strategic communities, largely where we have community presence sites already. We had 10 volunteer captains. So we had one community that had co-captains and another community that had tri-captains overseeing small teams of volunteers. So that's a little bit about how we were structured and some of the training components of getting to where we ultimately ended up. We can't hear you again.
How about now?
Yes.
I said I was trying to use my fancy button, but I had muted on the computer, so it didn't work. So technology's great when you know how to use
I
it.
love it.
I'm so curious, Jeannie, about this recruitment process, because I know you said you asked, kind of went out for a call to folks to go through this academy. Did you have to do any, any convincing or teeth pulling, or did lots of folks step forward to see what it was about?
We ended up sending 2 direct mail pieces to our members. I believe we did 2 10,000 piece mailers, encouraging folks to sign up for our activist academies. And we did end up with some new folks at the table. However, I would say that a large core of our volunteers who became involved in our voter engagement work around the primary were existing volunteers. So you've got Stephanie, who primarily had participated in fraud work previously that got involved in our voter engagement. Marc, who is part of our Capital City Task Force, our advocacy group, and then Mary, who's participated in numerous things. So we were able to pull from our existing core of volunteers from all different programs to get them involved in our voter engagement work, which was really exciting. So we had a good mix of some new folks, some really seasoned folks, and then everything in between. So
That's great. Thank you. And this is a pretty big deal in New Hampshire, so I can imagine that to be part of it, people were pretty interested to at least see what it was about, even if they were new volunteers to AARP. So, or relatively new, as Marc was. So let's talk a little bit about what it was like. I think all of you guys were team captains, right? Let's talk a little bit about what it was like to serve as part of that leadership team and in that role, because you were doing it for much longer than just the primary was going on. Let's talk a little bit about that. Who wants to start?
Well, I can start.
Go ahead.
I think we had great training and we had great materials to help us hand out and help us not just be with the candidate, but when we were at the events, also educate those people around us as well. And they gave us some wonderful giveaways. And one of the giveaways was a hand sanitizer. And who knew how much we would need the hand sanitizer
Highly
afterwards?
valuable giveaway item.
But we certainly, with all that training, we really understood what our role was. We understood what the issue was. And we could approach the candidate and the campaigns and the people around us and do the education and ask our questions very well. I felt very well prepared. When we were assigned our team members, I knew one team member from previous, but the other team members I did not know. So reaching out and how we're going to communicate, we're going to do it by text, we're going to do it by email, how do we get the information, and then making sure that we encourage people to come to the events. And that was probably the biggest challenge, is getting all our team members to show up to events.
Yeah.
But we always had people there. It was a good thing.
Absolutely amazing. Mary?
Well, I was thinking, we also had to take into consideration that we had to build in, a little bit of fun, because it was a lot, and also some flexibility, because people had different schedules. We had volunteers who did work full time. We had some volunteers that were in a caregiving, either for a spouse or a parent, or even just taking care of a grandchild. So with my team, we had set it up that I would send them an email, but I would text them to go look at the email and to let me know, when it was available. And they would respond back as to who could come and who couldn't. And I think because we built in the flexibility, I got a pretty good turnout of people that came. And I noticed that from all the other teams also. And I think it is because of that flexibility we had.
That's one of my favorite strategies, to text someone to check their email. Had a volunteer in Tennessee who said, I see your emails come in, but I don't read them unless you tell me to. So. Stephanie, anything you want to add?
Well, I was part of a 3-captain group, which was really helpful because we really started advocating in September. And when the holidays came up, we were able to make sure that we had coverage among our leadership. The other thing that I thought was very helpful was once a week, all the team captains would meet. And we would share what we were observing, what we saw worked, and that was very helpful. I mean, for example, one of the things I noticed in one of the events was that it seemed as if security was becoming more locked down. And so we were able to give everyone else a heads up so that they knew what to bring, what not to bring, and also when to show up. So it was just incredibly collaborative the whole time, intra-team and extra-team.
Yeah. That's great. So what do you think was the best part about serving in this role?
There were so many best parts. I think the first thing that popped into my head was just interacting with the public. AARP was beloved. They loved what we were doing. Of course, it didn't hurt to pass out hand sanitizers. The other thing we were passing out was coffee on the cold days.
Yeah.
But it didn't feel like we were selling. We were having conversations with people who wanted to talk to us and felt like we were helping to solve the real issues that they're confronting.
Yeah. Thank you. Others? Mark, Mary?
Yeah. Go ahead, Mary.
Oh, I just enjoyed the whole camaraderie between the volunteers, within my team, within all the other teams, within the staff, and even there were staff from across the country. I just loved it because it just seemed that we were all focused together. So it was just a great experience, I thought.
Yeah. Mark?
Yeah, I really think one of the best things to come are some of the friendships that developed with some of the other captains and the team members and other team members, because we would arrive to the events relatively early. So we all had a chance to talk and get to know each other and find commonality. So that's was a real social aspect for it, not just representing AARP, but just getting to know each other and working together better and really understanding each other. I thought that was great.
Yeah, for those of us who usually arrive at places on time or perhaps 5 minutes late, yes, you're right. We did arrive very early to those events. There was a whole, it was like an event before the event happened, right? It was a
Yeah,
lot. Uh,
it was fun.
yeah,
It was good though.
totally. So, Mark, you mentioned a little bit about some of the challenges. What do you guys think about this? You know, people have to be a challenge all the time. So managing those schedules, but what other, you know, kinds of things did you encounter in your leadership that that you had to kind of figure out how to work around or work with?
Well, really, trying to motivate people. And I mean, everybody's a volunteer and everybody has other things to do and other priorities. So trying to motivate people to get them out to the events, I think was certainly my biggest challenge. And I think another challenge we encountered at the events was because we were there early and press was there early, they would always want to come and talk to us. And ARP being a nonpartisan organization, we were limited as to our interaction with the press.
Yeah, I can only imagine how that was early on as well, because there was, you guys were probably some of the few who were really there every time something was happening. Yeah,
Mhm.
ladies, what do you think? Any other challenges?
So, yeah, I would say, yeah, the media was one of the challenges. That and the cold. You
Yeah,
had to make sure you dressed warm.
yeah, and you never know what you were gonna get, right? Like you may know where the event was, and you did, but you didn't know what the setup was gonna be when you arrived. So many places it was an outdoor queue, at least for the first little bit. All right. Well, so let's get into like what were the issues that were the main focus for AARP during this primary? Jeannie, you want to tell us a little bit about this?
Sure. So there were really four issues that were at the heart of our efforts. We had approved questions that we were able to ask of each of the candidates. Two of the questions were focused on the cost of prescription drug prices. One was on the first thing they do as president to lower costs, and the other was on drug company accountability.
Mhm.
We also asked a question about how they would help Americans live independently in their communities as they age. And the last question was on how they would keep Social Security and Medicare solvent for current and future generations. So our primary efforts were on the Stop RX Greed campaign, all about prescription drugs. But occasionally when we had enough volunteers and staff at some of these events, we would put multiple questions into the fish bowls or into the collections of questions that would be asked of the candidates. And sometimes we even got more than one question on more than one issue asked and answered.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you guys talked about how open people were to talking to AARP, and I think the RX greed being our number one issue, and especially those jackets. I didn't even think of. I have shirts and jackets and all kinds of things still up in the closet. You know, it really is something that knows no age. It knows no, you know, socioeconomic level. Like the cost of prescription drugs and access and all of that stuff is really something that unites people because we all deal with it or we know someone who has struggled with it. So it is interesting, and I won't be the spoiler because we're going to get to this, but you know, the next question, were the candidates generally responsive to the issues and the questions? Volunteers, what did you experience when you were first on the trail about how they were responding to you guys being there?
Well, I'm going to take the question backwards, which was I knew that we succeeded when the last week when you were with us, Tara, all the candidates that I saw had integrated our key messages into their stump speech.
Right.
And the other thing that was pretty exciting too was that they would call us out and thank us for the work that we were doing. And then what would happen is afterwards, the media would come over to talk to us, which was then an opportunity to talk more about the issues and AARP's position. So I think it was a significant achievement. And compare that to back in September when I think the candidates as well were still getting their water wings as far as their stump speeches and figuring things out. But they also got accustomed to seeing those red shirts and knowing there was going to be a friendly question, that it was not going to be confrontational. And sometimes you could tell that they would go to us purposefully just so they could get a breather and also say something that I think they believed in and supported, which was terrific.
Yeah, thank you. Mary, Mark, anything to add?
Uh,
No, it was pretty much the same experience. I think, as Stephanie said, they knew that we were not going to be confronting them. And it was, sometimes you never got the chance to put your question into a fishbowl or raise your hand, but just seeing it, as Stephanie said, our message of Stop RX Greed was put into the speech that the campaign candidate was talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to add to that, the first event that many of the candidates attend in New Hampshire is a breakfast called Politics and Eggs. And AARP sponsors that breakfast. So we had the opportunity to ask one question to the candidates, and this was the first time in New Hampshire. And it was very interesting that all the candidates said we got to lower drug prices in their speech at the Politics and Eggs. And when we would ask our question, like specifics, how are we going to lower it? Some candidates had a very well-defined plan, while other candidates just really didn't have a plan. And some candidates would say, well, what do you think? How do you think we can lower drug prices? And as we went along the trail a few months later, they all had a lot of detail as to how they were going to decrease drug prices, because we had asked the question so much and so often, they knew they needed to have an answer and have a lot of detail in their answer.
Yeah.
So it was an evolving of some of the campaigns as well. Not all of them, but a lot of the campaigns, there was an evolving issue with them. And you could see that they were spending issues on it. You could see they'd get off the stage and they'd go, I need to answer that better and get a better answer for it, you know?
Yeah.
It was real impact. You could see the impact that we were making through them.
Well, I've been with AARP almost 15 years, and this is truly exactly what you described, Stephanie, that, sometimes we work for years on something, getting someone who even is a candidate to acknowledge an issue we're working on and to address it, and it doesn't happen, or it happens in such a way that you're like, were they really talking about that? It's unclear. And this is one of those where I'm like, wow, you really it wasn't an instant return because you guys had been doing the work for so long, but it was one of those returns on the investment that really showed and was very rewarding as a staff member to also, see that happen so quickly. So on that note, what was it like to have such up close and personal access to some of the candidates? Because when you guys were there early on, the crowds weren't near as large as they were when I was there. So
Right.
what was that like?
It was a lot easier to get into an event. I started looking at candidates back in the spring, and there were minimal crowds, and they took they had conversations with you, but as things geared up towards the end of the year, it was starting to a little bit more busier, and then we started having the long lines. So it was nice though, because you got the chance to meet some of the candidates who had dropped out a little later.
Jeannie?
Raising my hand. So I just wanted to clarify, when Mary says spring, she's talking about spring of 2019.
Yeah.
So we saw our first candidate for the presidential primary on February 4th of 2019, of more than a full year before the primary that took place on February 11th of this year.
It's
So
unbelievable.
we're talking about, seeing candidates over the span of a year with more intensity in the 6 months leading up to the primary.
It's wild. Just really, really crazy to think about that.
It
Yeah.
is.
One of
And
the things
certainly
that-
some of the
Go ahead.
candidates, when you went to multiple events, particularly in the beginning, you would introduce yourself, and by the end they would like know your name, and they would like, last question, I'll ask Karen for the last question, or I'll ask Mark the last, because they knew what our question was. It was a good
Yeah.
way for them. It was a good way for them to end, and they would actually call us out by name to ask the questions. That was pretty. I thought it was pretty cool too.
Yeah. Stephanie?
I was surprised at the end at how we still had access to the candidates. I mean, some of them were still very busy, but several candidates would wait around until everyone had a chance to talk to them afterwards, which I thought was pretty gratifying.
Yeah.
The other thing that I thought was pretty important about what we do is that I saw that it was important to talk to everyone because all of the candidates are going to be policymakers that affect what happens to us in the future. So even though you might see in the polls that this particular candidate wasn't doing well, I thought it was important to still talk to them because they might be the ones to introduce legislation, or they might be the one who's in a cabinet position that can make changes. So I just think it was just very worthwhile.
Right.
Yeah.
And the thing is, because you got to see the candidates so many times, you could tell if their message was consistent, and it gave you the opportunity to really get to know that candidate after seeing them 3 or 4 times. So nothing, whatever the soundbite was in the media, you were there and you heard what the candidate was saying
It
from,
was
yeah.
Yeah, it was really hard for I've still had trouble putting this into words being back home and talking to people about that because they wanted to know what were these folks like. They said, what was the event really like, or what was their speech really like, and what did you think? And of course, it was difficult at times to really help someone understand that maybe what you saw in the media wasn't at all how they presented themselves in real life, and how there were several folks who I maybe never would have even known much about them had I not been there in person. And I think that's the kind of stuff that you just can't describe unless you've been part of it. So what can you guys share a story or a moment about this experience that will really stick with you forever? Anything so noteworthy you'll never forget it?
I'll start off. 2 days before the primary, we were in Rochester waiting in line as you always do, and I was talking to someone in line as you always do, and there was this really happy, upbeat woman who was standing in front of us. She was surrounded by all of us and was curious about what we were doing, and we kind of adopted her. And it turns out that she was there that day because she was going through chemotherapy and was getting bored at home and wanted to come in and do something. And she also believed in the messaging we had about stopping drugs. So we all sat down together. We even gave her a shirt, and she was just tickled pink. But this is why we do it, to help people. And it's also glad to see that she felt so good about being part of our team for that day.
Wow, that's really neat. Others? Jeannie's grinning.
We had, well, there are 2 things that come to mind. Because we got there so early, we had 2 gentlemen who kind of started getting there early too. So it was a toss-up as to whether we were going to be first in line or they were going to be first in line. But it was kind of interesting. And the other moment, to me, I keep coming back to this, is when I was at the candidate filings, and one of the candidates who was brand new to the New Hampshire primary, he came out and shook hands, and we had T-Rex there, and we had our Stop RX greets, and he did a double take because what? So I just kind of will stick with me because he was so surprised and so shocked.
I have one if you want me to share.
Yeah, go for it.
So a moment that will live with me forever was in the last few days leading up to the primary. A group of volunteers and some staff and myself, we were at a Pete Buttigieg event in Concord, and this was the 3rd time the AARP staff and volunteers had been to one of his events that day. Like we were seeing all the candidates multiple times in a day. And the AARP prescription drug question got pulled out of the fishbowl, and Mayor Pete said, "It is impressive how AARP and its allied organizations have mobilized to make sure that this is a central issue in this campaign." I know the quote by heart because I listened to the audio of it and I played it over and over and over again. And for me, hearing him say that, it just validated all of the blood, sweat, and tears that the staff and the volunteers had poured into this grassroots effort over the many, many previous months. And knowing, if I can flash back to just another moment, that happened just a couple months before that, when about a dozen of us were at a Buttigieg event, front and center, right in front of the podium, highly visible with our Stop RX Greed gear on at that point in time, and we could not get him to talk about our issues. So to see, you know, to go back to what Stephanie had said before, to go from the candidates not even giving us the time of day, or knowing what issue we were there and wanting them to speak on, to go from just automatically talking about it, you know, right off the top, or just, you know, recognizing the ARP was in the crowd and all the advocacy issues that we work on, was incredible. So those are kind of two moments mushed together that will stick with me forever.
Yeah. Thank you. Anything else to add, guys? It's a lot. There's just so many moments. I mean, I was only there for 10 days and still, you know, like I said, it's so much of it. I was having flashbacks to standing in line, and also the two, you know, most folks are like, oh, great. You got to go to New Hampshire for 10 days. It must've been great. I'm like, early mornings and late nights and much standing around waiting to get, you know, for something that might've been 20 minutes is something that is just really wild, because as you guys have also alluded to, a lot of the real stuff that was happening during that wait time. It wasn't even really the event that maybe was what was where the difference was made, for us as well, for the volunteers and the staff who were there having those conversations with others. So was there anything that stood out as being really exciting? Was there something that's different than what we talked about that was super exciting for you guys?
One thing that I found that was super exciting were the number of people who were observing the New Hampshire primary that were coming there almost as tourists, and especially the foreigners. I mean, I spoke with people from the UK, from Copenhagen, from Japan, who were just fascinated by the process. And when they saw us, they were fascinated by us too. So it was just, even though I think provincially about New Hampshire, this is something that has the world's attention. And I just thought it was wonderful.
Yeah, we were at a Chelsea event up in North, and there was actually a tour bus of people from Amsterdam who came specifically to New Hampshire so that they could be part of the primary and follow the candidates. And that was a surprise to me, because it was the first time I had thought about it. To me, the primary is been my life. You know, I grew up with it, but to know, like Stephanie said, that people from other countries were coming just specifically to view the primary.
Yeah, that was interesting. And to see the media from all over the world was really also pretty cool. Mark, anything to add?
Yeah, you know, the political tourists were pretty cool, and because we got there early, we got to chat with people really from all over the country, and at really just about every event there was some political tourists there. There were student groups that were there, college student groups that would come for a week and try to hit as many events as they could, and they were always enthusiastic and fun to interact with. And the most amazing thing to me, though, was a different presentation that the candidates had. You could really distinguish one person from the other person from the other person, and their different styles and how they answered questions and what questions they took, and even how they took their questions, and even some of how the campaigns were organized. We were in some places and they would let us in whenever we got there 2 hours. We were some places that would be standing out in 10 degrees with the wind blowing on us for an hour and a half before they'd let us in. It was very, very interesting to see those differences.
Yeah, every campaign definitely has their own personality, right? Like from their
They did.
staff to their supporters and that kind of
Oh,
thing.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So I think one of the coolest things for me to see was that at one of the events there were some, the more the further along we got, there was more controversy, I guess. There would be people who maybe were coming, who weren't supporters and weren't just curious, but were coming to really cause conflict. And someone started to kind of pick on the red shirts, right? And I think it was two ladies, stepped forward and pretty boldly stopped these folks and said what our talking points were, basically. And I was like, are they with us? And somebody was like, no, but they've seen us at a couple of events, and they were spot on. And then from that, it was almost like, you know, if you'd been bullied and then someone came and sit by you at lunch, they then came over and pulled up their chairs with our group. And, you know, I'm having chills talking about it now, because these are the things that as a staff team, when you are working at some of these events and activities where, you know, things can get a little heated, that we do worry about. We worry about our staff too, but we more worry about our volunteers, because they're not getting a paycheck to go out and deal with this stuff. And to see that strangers, you know, came to the aid of and knew what we were about, and knew the issues, because we had done a great job of talking to them when we'd seen them out or they had overheard it, was really remarkable, and something that I'll never forget, because that doesn't happen too often when you're an organization as big as we are, you know. That someone would step up and kind of defend your honor. It was really, really nice. So Mary, we're going to add something.
Well, no, I think too, along with that is the thing is, we kept stressing that AARP is nonpartisan, and I think because we stayed consistent on that message, a lot of people saw our red shirts and thought that perhaps we were for another candidate, and they wondered why we were at an event for a candidate of another party. And the media also, when they were asking questions, we just stayed consistent saying that we were nonpartisan, and we stuck to the issues that we were concerned about, which was the prescription drugs, Social Security, aging in place well, and also Medicare. And I think once they realized that we were not going to deviate from that message, they came to accept the fact that what we were doing was probably a good thing.
All right. So it's going to be another almost 4 years. It feels like this year is already, it should be gone, right? 2020. We should just cut bait right now and just be done with it. So it's going to be almost another 4 years before the next New Hampshire primary. Jeannie, how does New Hampshire plan to further the great work that your volunteers have done with voter engagement as you move forward?
It's a great question. So in New Hampshire and across the country, ensuring that voters have the ability to make informed decisions about where candidates stand on issues impacting the 50 plus is really at the heart of AARP's elections work. So here in New Hampshire, our down ballot primary will take place on September 8th. And then of course the general election is on November 3rd. So in the meantime, leading up to the primary on September 8th, we'll be reviving the voter engagement volunteers and hopefully enlisting them to help educate New Hampshire voters on issues like how to vote absentee. And we'll also be participating in some new tactics like a virtual bird dogging and helping with some of our virtual events. So given the pandemic and concerns around the coronavirus and really wanting to make sure that we are putting the health and safety of our volunteers and our staff first, we have elected to not do in-person events through the end of this year, through the end of 2020. So we're going to be trying some new things that we've never done before. I think the virtual bird dogging will be interesting. It's not something we've ever done before. Actually, we did our first event. We did a virtual politics and eggs with some volunteers about a week ago, and it worked great. So we're optimistic. But we're going to be reviving our volunteers, and maybe not quite the same structure that we used for the primary, but we have our work cut out for us with 2 congressional races, a Senate race, a gubernatorial race, and the presidential race where New Hampshire is a battleground state.
So I know that folks are hearing all of this and still have big question marks around the preparation and the time and energy that was spent. We've talked a lot about, you know, waiting in line at events and arriving early and kind of even at times checking our schedule the very night before, right before bed, you know, where do I have to be and what time and how long is it going to take me to get there? Let's talk a little bit about the time and energy you guys spent as you were leading up to the primary, and what was the pacing like? Because it was fast and furious while we were there with you. And, you know, what kind of time were you putting in before those last 10 days or so?
Oh, gosh.
Does
Well,
anyone
Tara,
remember?
I don't think,
It,
don't think that the last week was like the rest of the time. It was a slow acceleration up until probably January or mid-January. I think I was maybe going to 1 or 2 candidate events a week, versus the last week where we were doing 2 or 3 a day. So things really accelerated very quickly, but it was something that we expected. And I still have a day job, so I took vacation week that week and loved it.
That's really cool.
yeah.
Yeah, I was
I-
pretty similar, 1 or 2 events a week. And then as it accelerated, it was 2 or 3 a day.
Yeah.
It was interesting. The week leading up to the Iowa primary, I thought would be quiet because all the candidates would go out there. But we had some candidates who had given up on Iowa and were counting on New Hampshire. So they took our opportunity to hold even more events. So I was seeing those candidates sometimes twice a day. So
Yeah.
that was surprising to me.
Yeah. It was
But
interesting.
that's
Really interesting the way that you mentioned that they also sometimes added an event just almost what seemed like overnight, right? And you're like, how do they do that? That's so crazy.
yeah.
Especially when everyone was vying for space and, you know, and press and everything else. Mary, did you want to add something?
No, just basically pretty much the same. I think too, because New Hampshire is such a small state and you can basically cover it almost in a day. I think this is one of the reasons why they had 2 and 3 events. But I agree with Stephanie. I took some time off from work too, primary week, and I'm so glad that I did. And I'm only working part-time. So.
Yeah. I can't imagine trying to fit some of that in if you were also trying to fit it in with your work schedule. Jeannie?
So I would just add, you know, like I said before, we attended our very first candidate event in February of 2019. We participated in a number of politics and eggs events with ultimately a lot of candidates that dropped out of the race somewhere along the way, many of them before we even got to the primary. So our efforts really ramped up in September of 2019. And we kind of graduated from a leisurely pace to a brisk walk to then a jog. And then ultimately we were just in a dead sprint those last 10 days. But I will say, you know, when we tallied up the number of events that our volunteers participated in from September through the primary on February 11th, our volunteers attended over 300 candidate events. 50 of those events were just in those last 10 days leading up to the primary. So just a huge number of human energy and effort and time that went into participating in these events. Is really incredible.
Yeah, it was really, again, you guys mentioned this earlier, and getting recognized sometimes by the campaigns and stuff. It was fascinating because you knew that the work you'd put in and just the visibility, and that you were acknowledged as leaders by the campaign. Also, often resulted in, by the time you've done 300 events, you know, no one was questioning. For example, I think it was, oh my gosh, someone came out and got me once. I was not in line with the rest because I'd come from another event. I think it was Karen. Karen just like marched out, grabbed me by the hand, pulled me through this line, you know, just right through the door. Security didn't say a word. Nobody else was like, hey, what's she doing? They just assumed she was somebody with authority. Yeah. So it was also really neat to see how I'm sure that would not have been something that would have been necessary at the beginning, but how great for the rest of the team that, you know, that all that work really led up to being able to keep those prime spots in those events. I was really sad for you guys that literally the pandemic hit right after this was over and there was no party to celebrate. I think y'all are scheduled to have a party in early March, and we're in a holding pattern now. So it's going to be one heck of a party when you get to celebrate this, and hopefully it won't be at the next by the next primary. Hopefully it'll be sooner than that. So lastly, let's talk a little about what kinds of support you guys had. You've kind of alluded to some things. I know the Activist Academy was one of those things, but what other support did you had as captains to make sure that as things changed, that you guys were supported and that you were really well equipped to go out and handle all of this stuff that was going on, especially as it started to develop into a sprint?
I think I know, like, I had a lot of support from the state office. I mean, they were there, either text or by phone call if I had a question or if something came up that I kind of wanted a little bit of clarification. They gave us, as Mark said, they gave us our gear to wear. We got materials that we could pass out at candidate events. But I think that was the most important thing, is that the staff was there, so that if we had questions or if we were just not sure about something, we had a go-to place that we can go.
Yeah, I don't know if this was, I'm sure it was by design, but I'm going to say I don't know if this was intentionally as successful as it was, Jeannie, but you're a mastermind, so I'm guessing it was. The staff was amazing in that they were like your staff, right? Like, so everybody was on call. A couple of people were in the office in case folks needed to stop by, or they were prepping things that people could pick up or whatnot, or dropping things off to our hotel, things like that. But it was amazing that everyone, I think some of our friends in state offices who may not have this kind of activity that happens, but have big events that they're supporting, when they think all hands on deck, they sometimes deploy all the hands, and that causes some problems. And in this case, it was amazing that it was a gift if you showed up by surprise, because you could pop into an event, that you guys really were the support for all the work that was happening out in the field. And I'm not sure that that would be the go-to for folks. So folks who are listening and maybe, send everyone out on an assignment may learn something just from that, to think about how to really make sure that support is available and accessible. And I know at times there were folks who were, they might have been at home, but the phone didn't even make a full ring before they picked up to answer, or they were responding to the text message just immediately after it was sent. So well done on that regard, because I know that the office door was a revolving door that week for sure.
I just want to say that was definitely by design. So, especially in that 10 days leading up to the primary, in a lot of ways, I almost saw myself as more like a concierge to the volunteers. I'm here for whatever you need. Let me know what you need. We'll make sure we get it to you, whether it's myself or one of our other staff. As I said in the very beginning of the podcast, that I wanted to make sure that the volunteers were the leaders. So even when we brought in staff from 8 other states, we did not bring those staff in to serve as leaders of teams. They were brought in to be integrated into our volunteer-led teams. And that worked really well. And for a lot of the staff, I think that was kind of the first time where they had been integrated into a volunteer team, and they were receiving the marching orders from the volunteer leaders. And that was totally intentional. So I think that's a really good point, Tara, for others listening to this. Make sure that you don't deploy all your hands. Somebody, 1 or 2 people need to really stay behind to make sure that we can get the volunteers what they need and the information they need, or just simply be able to answer the phone or reply to a text message if something comes up in the moment.
Yeah, thanks.
We also had daily phone calls in that last sprint period, those last 10 days. So I think that was helpful as well. If you had questions, or you could learn about other people's experiences on those phone calls, it would help prepare you for the day.
Yeah, and like you said, someone mentioned the security earlier and how some of that stuff changed. That was even changing within that last week, right? About the kinds of stuff that they would let you bring in or whatever. And it was important to know that, because when you're getting there early and maybe have to walk a ways from the parking area to get to that spot, it was pretty inconvenient to have to go back and drop something that you could have had a heads up about before. Yeah. Well, guys, this has been so wonderful and enlightening, and I hope that it's been helpful to everyone who's listening or watching. Anything else you guys want to add that you'd want to share, tips or tricks or anything at all?
Tara, I would just say that I think we are happy collectively. I think that we have 5 more volunteer captains who are not on the call here today, and the 3 who are here, and certainly myself and other resources in the New Hampshire office. I think we would be more than happy to chat with folks if they have more questions or want to pick our brains about how they could incorporate some of the tactics that we utilize for the primary in their regular voter engagement work, or as they look to their own primaries. We're happy to continue the conversation outside of this podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think my parting words, I was thinking back to what did I bring to the teams that I showed up for, and I was reminded it was the snacks. So don't forget the snacks when I had an AARP bag full of snacks, because we realized really quickly that there were some folks, if they did have even 2 events in the same day, sometimes they didn't get to stop for lunch, or it was going to be a while before they had dinner. You never quite knew the length of time you were going to be there, because some of those candidates were also trying to maximize the number of events in a day. So always designate somebody for snacks. Well, thank you guys. It's been really fun. It's been so nice to see you again.
Oh, yeah.
And Stephanie, Mary, Mark, you guys are awesome. Jeannie, thank you for helping set all of this up. Thank you guys for listening or for watching, and we'll see you next time.
All right.